Well, welcome everybody to the second listening session of Klezmer fiddle music. So today we'll listen to some more stuff. I had some ideas about a few things. I was listening to some of this Dave Terrace and the Allen Street Gypsies recordings, like the 50s American stuff, which I think is a cool style that nobody ever really sort of talks about or teaches so much, at least from a fiddle perspective. And it's just an example of something else that happened. Although Pete Rushefsky has pointed out that there are these great masterworks that may or may not be slightly more classical than some traditional players might have been, but there's a lot in them that we should dig into, and we will. And then also I thought, I don't know, we haven't talked about Belf at all, which is like a whole other world. And then the other thing I thought about was getting more into the Leonal Doina, and possibly comparing the two Gegna Taksim recordings, which are very similar. So this is Dave Terrace and the Allen Street Gypsies, which I still haven't figured out who the fiddler is, which I would love if anybody knew. 1957. Yeah. That's
number one.
Number one.
Terrace is not on that.
Right. Yeah, there's not.
I don't think Terrace ever was on any of their cuts. You know the story behind that? This is from Zeb. So correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll tell you this Zeb has said. There was a company, I think, called Capital, owned by a Greek American who was putting out a lot of Terrace stuff. And around 1950 or 48 or so, he was good friends with Terrace. And one of the ways he advertised other bands is he put out an LP, which were new at the time, of Terrace. And as an advertisement, he slapped on 4 cuts of the Allen Street Gypsies. And then on the Allen Street Gypsy LP, he slapped on 4 cuts of Dave Terrace. Okay, I found this out because on our first CD, I recorded a mandolin piece that I learned from a tape that said Dave Terrace, and it included that. And I'd heard the apocrypha that Terrace played mandolin, which Yankee says was true, but he never saw him do it.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Oh, this must be Dave doing mandolin. Great, I'll do it." And then found out later that that was the Allen Street Gypsies, and it was a sort of add-on cut onto a Terrace album at a time when LPs were new, and nobody had really established like what your friend, the sleazy Greek record label owner, was allowed to or expected to do. And so we don't know. I don't know much about who was the Allen Street Gypsies. I believe Allen Street was the Jewish Market Street in Chicago. But that's it.
Right.
Allen Street, was it a Chicago label, Bob?
I don't think the label was Chicago. I think the label was, I don't know, New York.
I mean, the Lower East Side has Allen Street.
Capital, yeah. It was named called Capital.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there is Allen Street in the Lower East Side, too.
That could be it. That could be it.
Hard to say. Interesting, though.
It doesn't sound like they're gypsies. If I had to guess, there were people who played with a Jewish inflection, but were American, maybe American born.
Certainly don't sound like gypsies. I mean, they sound like, it sounds like early, it sounds like a, 30s, 40s, 50s style, New York style, Americanized sound. It doesn't, classical player who was probably most definitely reading from a chart anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's. I think it's recorded in 57.
Could possibly be a Jewish band trying to be not marketed away from the Jewish thing. A Jewish band marketed as, hey, gypsy music.
Right. Right.
The Dave Avalon scene.
Yeah. I mean, according to Daniel, to somebody's post on the thing, it's from a 57 record called "Music of the Jewish People," which definitely does not say Klezmer. But yeah, I mean, I'm also, I don't know, I like this, like the way they're playing is like I feel like you couldn't play that way sort of before the recording industry or something. Like it's like, it's playing almost more like a horn player or something, like where you can balance out with the other instruments in a way that if you're like trying to cut through in a big ensemble as a string player, you sort of like would have to do other things, I think.
I've sort of felt like, actually, I don't know if I would necessarily agree with the like classical thing, because there were some moments when I felt they were being like super kind of rhythmic, like it almost sounded like a polka or something. But then they would go into these longer phrases that are much more sort of fluid in time and sound super kind of Romanian Jewish to me. I think I think the phrasing there is really pretty in that traditional pocket.
Yeah, but it in the 40s and 50s, classical orchestras sounded much different than they do now. So if you heard even Toscanini's orchestra, the phrasing that they did on any of the stuff they played would have sounded like a cafe fiddler to us, because they really didn't play it as there was a lot more portamento, there was a lot more sliding, there was a lot more personality. Fiddle sections were allowed to put into their style, not like now where if you slide up a fifth, the whole orchestra stops. So I think, I'm sure that there was an understanding and maybe even, heritage-wise of a Romanian style, but that violinist definitely sounds classically trained. I mean, like any of us can go back and forth between different styles too, depending on, if I would play a gig with Pete Socolow, you too, Jake, you're not going to play in this style, you play his way. And so I feel that was kind of, musicians had to work and be able to do everything. It wasn't, we couldn't really I mean, if they played on a street band, they'd probably sound very different. I don't know.
Right.
Also, listen to them. There's no pre-mosh roll here. I mean, who's the leader? The accordion player or the violin player? No, they rehearsed it together, and nobody's depending on a pre-mosh, a lead player.
Right.
They're good, but there's no clarinet. If it were terrace, the clarinet player would stand out, and you would know, aha, he's showing off. A good pre-mosh, a good gypsy musician would make sure you know that I lead the band and I get the tip. This sounds like an ensemble.
Right, and the harmonies seem to be pretty consistent on like the different parts also, right? I mean, I think I do feel like what Cookie's saying, or like kind of like a session musician, maybe it's like what we call it, somebody that has the training and can play any sort of gig and like has reference points for sure for Jewish music. It might be also like a Jewish or Armenian Jewish fiddler.
I'm looking at Billboard magazine from the
I was doing exactly the same
1950,
thing.
and it describes them as salon-styled instrumental crew turns into danceable, listenable Freilich.
Oh.
And then another track, fine fiddle and accordion here too. Bulgar side is pleasant, lively dance music.
Oh yeah,
nice.
Look at that.
Yeah,
and
I do.
All list on the UPenn site. They just list Dave. They don't list the other musicians. They list Dave Terrace.
Right. I do. I love, Jake, the point you made anyways about the rhythm of like those parts and the lyricism and phrasing of the other, like, of it all in general.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
I have this thought that's maybe like departing a little bit from this recording in particular, though. But I think a lot about when we talk about classical training. It makes sense in sort of our frame of reference in sort of Western Europe and North America. If you want to get sort of, technical training on the violin that is really rigorous, you need to study classical music. But in my experience in Romania, that's not the case. I mean, I know a lot of lautari that never played classical music ever, and they're monster technicians. I mean, you would listen to them, and in our frame of reference, you would say, "Oh, this person clearly has classical technique. They're playing super in tune, bow control's amazing, beautiful tone, like all of that stuff." But I know that they never studied classical music, so. So that's a sort of interesting thing when we talk about classical training. What is that actually?
Right. Yeah, I mean, like the vibrato, I think sometimes can be a clue, which is one of the things I hear. Cookie, you have something to...
No, I think it's that's a great point, and I hadn't thought of that, but I know that Jewish players in Eastern Europe, if they could afford it, if their parents could afford it, at least in my experience with my family, just the stories I heard about the fiddler in Veretsky, he could play a Strauss waltz, he could play. My father said badly the Mendelssohn violin can, whatever that. So it was because, I think the Jewish sense of education didn't just start with the American generation. If they could afford it, especially if the fiddler was a male, they would be sent to study. But, I think Jake's point is great. Even in the States, a session player that can play sessions is hired for sessions. If they've got chops, they can be hired. And, good musicians can pick up technique just by playing tunes or by learning from another person. And I guess what I mean by, it sounds to me that person, it just sounds like they're reading, because on the repeats, they're doing the same things. And I guess that's what I mean by classical player, is somebody who can read notes. And, not necessarily study the repertoire, the classical repertoire, but just have enough skills that they could sit in a reading session.
I'm curious, Cookie, just quickly, because you mentioned that sort of. Last week we were listening to some of the Maggid stuff and noticed that there was a female name as one of the fiddlers in one of the trios. And we were talking about like a bit of like how much, were women playing in sort of these types of ensembles. And just because you mentioned if they were male, they might go to conservatory. Did you hear anything from your family about female fiddlers, or like have any idea about how much women were performing around there?
No way.
No.
Mm-mm. Oh, I just got an email from Josh who said some of his violinists, terraces, were, of course, Bayerish Cats,
Yeah.
Al Glazer and Giulietta Marino.
Hmm. Huh.
Giulietta Marino, a violin with Terrace and the Bagelman sisters. So those were some of the fiddle players.
I just want to mention back to Cookie's point about kind of the musical training in the Russian Empire. I mean, the St. Petersburg Conservatory was one of the only institutions that was open to Jews that wasn't didn't have severe quotas put on. So I don't know if anybody's seen Jim Leffler wrote a wonderful book about the conservatory and about Jewish involvement in it, called the most Jewish favorite nation, or the most favored nation, or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a great book about the conservatory and its Jewish links.
One of you must know exactly, like, when did Jews start going to conservatory? Because it's like the late 19th century sometime.
Wasn't it like the 1880s or 1890s when somebody allowed, I can't remember. I did a lecture on Jewish violin, and it was really about the classical myth of the Jewish sound, not even the myth, but the thought of the Jewish sound. And I found a violinist that, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. What's his name? I'm having a senior moment. Wait, I have it up on my music thing. He died in his 20s of some kind of, where is
Joseph Kossid?
Yes! Yes. Have you heard his stuff?
Just a little bit. They mentioned him on that like PBS Art of the Violin documentary.
Yeah,
and, like,
he died of syphilis or something. He was in an insane asylum and he died of syphilis in his late 20s. You want to hear some? Do you want to hear a little spot of him?
And could you write his name in the chat?
Sure. Hold on. It's Hassid. Wait, chat. Hold on. Okay. Bye, Matthew. Okay, Joseph. And I think it's, let's see, Joseph with an S, F.
That's Mitia.
Isn't that beautiful?
Wow.
I like how it doesn't end on the tonic.
Well, no, it's not. It keeps going. I stopped it. But
Okay.
you're right. Craig wrote, we're not allowed to, let me just go stop share here. We're not allowed to play that way anymore. It's not taught that way. That all the finger substitutions, blah, those are so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
So much rubato.
Yeah, and
He even played a crest in there somewhere.
well, he did a little turn, like a 1-3-1. So I guess that would do DBA as a crest, definitely. But it's that kind of playing that was prevalent in orchestras. That was from 1940, that recording.
Menuhin did a lot of those kinds of slides.
Oh, yeah.
Finger substitutions, all of that. His left hand was really similar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really
Much more
interesting.
romantic.
So I also think that, those days it was much more common for even classical players to be able to sit and jam with people. They just were less specialized. And ear playing was something done at home, and note reading was done on the gig. So, I think the style had more. Of course, I'm romanticizing it, but I personally hate the crystal clear sound that's happening in orchestras now. It's boring. So I'm being an ideologue. I'll probably change my mind tomorrow, but that's that.
I know that the Boston Symphony, I believe in their early early 20th century, part of their audition used to be that you brought a piece that you wrote. And
wow.
So there was a very creative aspect of it. I believe the New York Phil they also had something like that as well, like where they were like, we want to see that you're a creative musician as well. And that's kind of just totally gone now.
I remember my classical instrument is viola. It's not violin. So I remember sitting, we were doing one of the Brahms symphonies, and I was second chair, so I'm right under the conductor's nose hair, and I went, "Baya," and he went, "Who did that?" And my stand partner went, "She did it." He said, "No portamento in this movement," and I was like, "Fuck you!" But I didn't say that. No children there, right? But it's a different sensibility now, and I think it'll change. I think things are in flux, and I think that. Also, what's interesting is that here we are, we're discussing klezmer violin, right? We're discussing the influences that happen, that affect the Jewish sound. And what I think a lot of, there's been these discussions, well, do we slide up? Do we slide down? A lot of the musicians who did what felt good and what they heard in their town, right? I mean, a violinist is going to slide up and going to slide down when they want to. So I think that it's good to be an observant listener. And, if I hear somebody doing something I've never done and I like it, I'm going to try to make it work. So it's kind of one of those, why did you do that? Because I can, or I just learned how, or whatever like that. So I think it's kind of, what's the word? Not dangerous, but limiting. I mean, I think if a violinist was missing a fingertip, they played different. I learned that studying Polish fiddlers, when one guy had the tip of his second finger off. And so when he put his second finger down, it was somewhere between, like say in the A string, between a C and a C sharp. He called it, I said, what do you call that note? He said 2, because he uses his second finger. So that was kind of like, okay, well, academic, let's figure that one out, or not.
Yeah, there's limits to how much understanding is useful. Should we listen to something else or listen to that one more time, having thought about that? But maybe we should just move on.
Something else.
Yeah, something else, yeah. So I thought either we should go back through American stuff or listen to something else with classical influence. This is, okay, well, please, Pete Rushefsky.
Pete wants to listen to more American stuff.
Yeah. No, so maybe we should listen to the Gegna.
Mani's Chardash.
I could play that if you want.
We can all play. Let's do a Zoom Monty startup.
Yeah. Well, Jacob Gegna was, recorded some beautiful Jewish music in Europe, and then in America recorded the same tune without the tune after it, and then became the concertmaster of the LA Phil, and also I think in New York something, and like published some things. So that could be a reasonable sort of related place to go. Yeah.
Sure.
Bob, are you going to get bored yet? We'll find out.
I'm here.
He's here. Well, okay, let's do that then. Okay, I'm the boss. And I kind of think we should maybe even just listen to both recordings back to back. I'm just curious, have you guys all done that before? Maybe? No, great. Let's do it. Yeah. So the first one has the whole tune. We'll listen to the later one, I guess, because that doesn't have the tune after it. What?
Jews don't do that.
Jews don't do that. Yeah, so he recorded it in what's it called? Somewhere. Well, whatever, somewhere in Europe. Oh, right. This was something actually I wanted to mention before we continued from Matthew Stein's thesis. Apparently, in 1933, the Journal of Applied Psychology did a study, and amongst the 12 most major symphony orchestras in the U.S., 51% of the first violinists and 34% of the second violinists were Jewish. And then 45% of the conductors and 47% of the violin soloists were also Jewish. Among the violas, Cookie was only 32.5%, 25% of the cellists, and 15% of the bassists. And
I think they were all Jewish, but they just didn't understand the question.
Right, yeah. Percussionists had 16%, and Jews were only 3.5% of the American population.
What about the piccolos? Does it have something to do with
it? It doesn't say, although you'd imagine they were pretty good. In Europe, like in Paris, London, and Munich in 1933, Jews accounted for less than 5% of the members. And obviously there's, some sort of political things happening that might influence why there's so many Jews trying to get to America and get an orchestra gig, and why they're not playing in Munich.
Bankers.
Yeah, I don't have the info for bankers. Sorry, Bob. I don't know if that's what you said, but anyways. So let's listen to this thing now that just to give us an idea, like this was definitely, it was a way out for Jews and something that they had gotten a bit of training in. Cool. So let's listen to some Gegna. So I believe we'll start with the American recording, which is like something like 1921, and then we'll listen to one from 5-7 years earlier of the same piece. And so here is 7 years. Sorry, that was New York. Here's early. Yeah.
Where was it recorded in Europe?
Where? I just had that info. Oh, it's on this note. Do, 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 do. It was born in Poltava or Kiev. And it was, right, he moved to New York in 1914. He might have been a student of Auer, who might have been Bob's great something or other.
No way.
Right, Bob?
Yeah,
What?
found that out yesterday.
Wow.
His mother.
Tell us, what's the story?
His mother's name was Gross. He was born in Bestrom, in the same street area where my family lives, who are named Gross.
There you
There's
go.
not many Jews in Bestrom either. Yeah. So yeah, apparently his mother's side of the family, great. It also makes me a cousin of Agnes Heller, who recently passed away. But apparently, yeah, it was his father was a small businessman right in the town square, and his mother's maiden name was Gross. And my grandfather's from that town. His name was Gross.
Yeah.
Is it in Hungary?
Yeah,
Where is it?
yeah. Veszprém, north of Lake Balaton.
Wow.
Yeah. So from now on, anybody playing the violin has to go through me.
As they should, really. But yes, okay, it was recorded in 1913 in Poltava, and then in 1921, the one without the close little thing at the end was recorded in New York. which I've always wondered, is there some reason why he like repeats the sort of B section, like the part on the C minor chord in the second recording, and doesn't play the dancey bit? You know,
It occurs to me they're so similar that he had probably notated it as his own piece or gotten it from a teacher or something.
right.
It was notated. There's not a lot of variation between the two ways he plays it.
Yeah, there's
What
almost
there
none.
is in his bowing and his dynamics, but he probably considered it a composition, you know, and
Yeah.
played it as such.
Right, I'd always seen this as like evidence of like, you know, well, maybe like not everybody actually played so many variations, or some of these like Doinas especially were really kind of like a bit more composed than we give them credit for. But I think also it might be some evidence that he was really did also have this classical training, and you know, he's not necessarily our case study of your typical wedding klezmer, right? As we talked about.
No,
last
he's
week.
definitely not.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying last time, which is I think that the choice of violinists who were chosen to record for a lot of the earlier companies, they weren't they weren't like recording country fiddlers. They were recording top-selling concert musicians that they could find for specific audiences. And I think that's where he and a lot of the other early Klezmer fiddles that we have, these are guys that if they had walked into the office and said, I want to play the latest Chopin, the record company would have said, yeah, but we have somebody else that does that. What do you have? You know, what audience are you reaching?
Right. Obviously, it's definitely still quite Jewish, quite Yiddish playing, and really beautiful and expressive.
No, in that part of the world at that time of history, there were millions of us. And we all spoke Yiddish.
Right.
Now there aren't.
And played fiddle.
Not only that, we ran banking.
Bob. Yeah, I mean, and just performance-wise, I mean, to me, like, his timing is so incredible, and it's like I've tried to play with this and, you know, play after listening to it so many times, and like, just like the way he gets those phrases across is really, really special, I think. And like something that I think like Jake talks about a bit when I hear him talk is like just like the articulation. You know, it's like it's not all mushy and like, you know, sometimes it is gushing a bit, but it's like there's really interesting bits, and like some of those phrases, like I think the first one, it's like it's whatever, one of those I believe is bowed and one of them is separated, right? It's like he's sort of really making choices about that stuff, which I find interesting. Look, the Jew of Oklahoma has arrived, I believe. I'm going to mute him. Wow. See, this is the first time in my life I can just mute Mark Rubin. Now I can ask him to unmute. No, who would want to do such a thing? Yeah, Mark, we're listening to Jacob Gegna and his Taksim, which I think we've played together a few times. Yeah, some other thoughts? Cookie, what did you... I'm sure you've...
What?
Would you have any deep Cookie thoughts about...
Well, I think...
This?
You know, what's interesting is, you know, when you listen to a player, I think one thing that is not studied enough in our genre and not explored enough is the use of the bow. As you know, I tell my students your fingers are the words, but your bow is the breath, and there's so many amazing. Very, very subtle expressions you can use with the bow, you know, and one of the things that I practice is bow articulation, and I don't mean like fancy ass shit and any of that, but how to, you know, if you take a phrase, how to make it sound like you're singing. And I think a lot of times when people learned, you know, when I was younger and my father would teach me, he would sing to me, or it was really yelling, but he would yell and expect me to understand what he was singing. And so I learned that, you know, if he sang a song or hummed a melody, if his voice was quiet at the beginning of the note, you know, and crescendoing or getting more intense, and then less at the end, I had to figure out a way to do that on the bow. And then when I started studying classically, of course, all of that stuff came in. But, you know, for me, when I love a player, it's because they are really using the bow as their breath. And so I think a lot of the Jewish style, you know, when I've talked to classical players about, you know, what is the Jewish sound? And it's really the use of the bow, I think. Anybody can have fast fingers, but if the bow doesn't, what's the word? Have variations, like vocal variations, then it you know, it's an incomplete thing for me.
Well, you think that's true about every single violin style? Just in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, there is some, like I've listened, you know, some of the Polish stuff that I've listened to, the ones I like are the ones that really have a very energetic sound, but I'm talking about in one note, the different variations you can make. I don't think that's in every style. I think a lot of the dance styles don't have that, and well, it's not that they don't have it. Each player has their own way of doing it, but it's not accentuated. It's not
Well, I guess what I mean is that the feel of the music happens through the bow. I don't know.
Yes, definitely.
How else to do it?
Yeah,
right?
of course. Of course,
So,
yeah.
So yeah, totally. What you're talking about, there's this very particularly Ashkenazic Jewish way of using the bow that we like. If you're gonna seriously try to play in this tradition, you need to know what that is. You need to study it. But I think that's kind of true with any style, and it's true with classical music and like any other folk. I mean, there's just like a lot of different languages of bow use.
Correct. Right. Yeah. And I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Well, I was just say like there's there's this whole thing like of like what seems like a semi-common description of Jewish fiddlers that like they could play one note and it would make you cry, you know, and like I've wondered a lot like how do you do that, you know, and it's like I feel like yeah right, you bow into
Part
their
of it is the
eyeball.
audience program to hear that note and cry.
That's exactly right.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great
That's definitely
point.
part of
it. You know,
it.
it's like when somebody says what makes something sound Jewish. Well, it may not sound Jewish to you know what Josh always says, well, who wants to know? Why is that important to you? You know, it's really true. I mean, if you play in a certain style that the audience comes to, they cry before you put your bow on the string. So.
I mean, I do think there's something to like. I mean, like for me, it's like this Gegna, like the first note he played, it's like it definitely like, okay, I want it to be good, but it does get me. And like I think to what Jake was kind of saying, it's like in old time music, of course, the bowing is pretty much the most important thing, but like they never do a bow like that, you know. So it's like I think this sort of it all makes sense what everybody's been saying.
Another thing is,
I'm curious, like
whenever I'm a musician family, the kid is around the music when he's a kid, and then if if he shows interest, the parents stick a fiddle or an instrument in his hand. If he sticks with it, he's allowed to stick with it. And basically, at a point where, I mean, Jake has seen this with me. We went into the village of Palazzo, where there's.
I was about to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah. And we show up in Palazzo. We're waiting for the musicians to the village bar. And there's this 3-year-old kid, not even 3-year-old kid.
I think it was like 2.5, right?
Yeah, who must be, in college by now. But no, he's not in college. In the Army by now. But they simply put a fiddle in his hand, and he would do the bow. He knew how the contra bowing went. He had the whole posture. It was like a dancing game for him. He wasn't going to do the chords. He wasn't going to do melodies. But he had the bowing, And then later, when the guys started playing in the bar, and this is not for an audience, this is for their own family, sitting around on a Saturday night having beer. They allowed the little kid to come in with a fiddle. He's not going to destroy the sound, and just participate. And they would point to him and go, "Hey, go Chevy!" And the little kid would just do the postures of a fiddler. All right, this is late.
But it was so amazing that his left hand wasn't doing anything at all, but he knew every single tune because his bow was going exactly in the same direction.
That's amazing.
Wow. the guy who leads that band now is Florian Kodobaum. I've known him since he was a kid. When he was a kid, he couldn't play well, and but like he was the same kind of thing. He knew kind of this stuff. And there's a video. He's now the leader of the band. He's great. There's a video when he was made one about 1994 when he was just a teenager, and it's with his father and his uncle, and they're playing, and he's the third fiddler, and you can see he doesn't really have the fingering at all yet, and he's just following the bow strokes and the accents, and he's got it perfectly. And when you see this man play, the bows move in unison, but there's no other way to do it.
Right.
It's not so much that they learn the melody, it's that they seem to learn the choreography of this, you know? And that comes from growing up within a particular kind of music. So if you're growing up in a Klezmer family in 1890 in a shtetl, you'll play like your uncles do. You know, you're not going to play like somebody else does until you get to your mid-20s and you're really a prodigy and you see some gypsies come through, whose style will probably not be a hell of a lot different than yours. And you pick things up. Yeah. But you don't find people who have these, you know, prodigy styles where they can do 6 or 7 styles. I've never met anybody in East Europe who, you know, in the tradition, who played more than 2 styles outside of their tradition. These guys can play amazing things. Just don't ask them to play a little bit of samba, you know?
Even was Lupu? Was that the one you were saying? Like
Yeah,
really
Lupu
was
could play what he
a
played.
style or
No one ever asked him to do it otherwise. Nobody ever asked him to play a little, you know, little Stefan Grappelli. Everybody wants to try and play Stefan Grappelli. Everybody,
Yeah.
You know, and you know they can't, you know, and it doesn't go anywhere. Now everybody has the Zeta electric violins, and they can just sort of put the Stefan Grappelli chip in there. But that's mainly the one style they would like to. They would like to think of themselves as playing something they call in East Europe jazz. I think Jews, if you listen to the band that used to play in Krakow, the Rosner brothers, was it the Rosners? They're the people who are portrayed in the Schindler's List movie, and then they moved to Australia. They put out several things. They sort of played a Jewish tango style. The Rosner brothers, you know, maybe Rose and Rosner, they had that style, which we also hear in the Allen Street Gypsies, this sort of smooth, acceptable cafe salon style with hints of Jewish and hints of tango. You know, that was something that comes on later, especially under the influence of, say, radio. Where you hear music.
Right.
When
yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was just gonna say when I'm working with violinists who are trying to learn klezmer, one thing I often suggest is try and play the melody only with your bow. Don't put any ornamentation on your, what do you call it? Your fretting hand? What do you call it on a violin? Your fingering hand.
Left hand.
That left hand, or if you're a righty, I suppose. Just you try to get all the sound elements out of your bow before you add the left hand.
Right.
I never learned the ornaments at home at all. I just learned, you know, the only thing I learned at home was the open string style playing, rhythmic open string. I never learned a kres or a trill or anything. It was just learning from a song, from vocalization. So that came later. It's really interesting watching this. Hi, Madeline. It's interesting watching this thinking about this also, you know, the way early musicians talk about Baroque music and reading treatises and, you know, trying to figure out how was it done when we don't have recordings. And, you know, there are people that are very oppositionally just so far apart and very convinced. So it's really kind of one of those things that I think, Pete, when you said without the ornaments, you can still get a very Jewish sound with no ornaments. And, you know, that's all. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I told you last when we were in Maramuresh a long time ago. When Kovac George Chata, fiddler who played with Muzikash. And I had to ask him, what did you think the difference in style for Jewish fiddlers and not Jewish fiddlers? He said they didn't play with much ornament. He said they played with the bow, but not much ornament.
You mean when he was
And you
speaking
hear a
about
lot of-
Jewish musicians?
a gypsy's opinion of Jewish musicians. When they played, they did not ornament much. And then in the repertoire of Jewish tunes that they remember, they're not heavily ornamented in any way, the way the local Romanian or Hungarian tunes would be. And it stands out.
And you know what my dad said is that the gypsy fiddlers, if their kids played too slow, they say, why you play like a Jew? And the Jewish parents, when their kids played really fast, why are you playing like a gypsy? So it's really interesting, the sensibilities. But it's really interesting, Bob, that it's, I think that we reapply tradition, and that's how tradition changes too. It's like, look at the the advent of Reform Judaism and liberal Judaism and Reconstructionist and whatever. For us, it's so new, but for our kids, that becomes their tradition. So that's how the kids growing up in the klezmer scene now are hearing all the ornaments, and that's what they're associating with. It's not bad because it's just how tradition changes. But and I'm sure it'll change more. It's just with an eye on historical progression. Obviously, this art form stopped during the Holocaust. It went to sleep, and it didn't really wake up until the 1960s, early 70s. And so it's kind of being recreated, and I don't think it's a bad thing as long as there's a worldview of historical style. But
Well, and let's be honest, it wasn't just the Holocaust, right? Like there was, it did continue a little bit, and in Europe already, like, there weren't so many Jews playing fiddle, I think, from 1920 to 1940, right? Like Bergovsky says he had trouble finding anybody who was playing in like a real working band, and they were mostly people who played 40 years ago. Of course, there were, but it's like not as much, especially in that part of Ukraine, maybe, versus in Poland there was more, and in Western Ukraine and in Romania, I'm sure there was still more stuff happening. But like, I think often, like, it's easy to say it was just like the Holocaust killed like Yiddish culture or something, and it's like, assimilation and emigration and cultural shifts and urbanization also. That was my main point.
When I lived in Botoshan, I asked like pretty much every older person that I could about what Jewish life was like when they were young, and these were people in their 60s, maybe 50s or 60s, so that would have made them born in the 50s or 1950s or 60s. So this was post-war, and pretty much everybody I asked said that there was like, the downtown of Botoshan was completely full of people preparing for Shabbos on a Friday afternoon. There was Yiddish everywhere up until probably the 1970s. Some of the Jews I asked about their family, one of them actually said that their family lived through the war the entire time staying in Botoshan. They never even left town, and nothing happened to them. And if you go to the Jewish cemetery, there's an old cemetery and a new cemetery, and there's a massive new cemetery of graves from the 70s, 80s, not so much 90s. So
people who died of old age, though?
Yeah.
And then since then, everybody went to Israel and the States and wherever, or what's happened?
Mostly people went to Israel.
Died?
Yeah, mostly people went to Israel because Ceausescu had a racket selling visas for Jews to emigrate to Israel, and Israel needed people, so they paid him.
Yeah, then after 1990, they went everywhere. Yash emptied out. Yash went from in 2 years from 6,000 or 3,000 Jews down to 600.
Wow.
So I sort of had to wonder, there were obviously Jewish weddings happening in the 1960s and 70s and even 80s in Botoshan. Yeah, what kind of music did they have? There were a lot of gypsies playing for weddings then. So what did
Stu and his first wife Leslie were in Romania in 1972, and they crashed a Jewish wedding. And one of the pieces on one of our records, which we call Tango Under the Influence, comes from his Sony Walkman tape of that wedding. And it was a song, there was two tubas, an E-flat clarinet, a trumpet, and a singer singing this amazing thing. And it was at a Jewish wedding, but it sounds very, I have it. Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
Okay, let me find it. I think I have it. Keep talking. I'm
Yeah,
going to look.
while she's doing that, I just want to welcome Keryn Kleinman, who just got off of something else. First time.
Hey.
Just in time for some Romania talk.
Romania talk.
Yeah, I think that there is still a plan to do like a full-on Romania session. So let's save some good stories, you two. But this is super interesting.
Da, facem românești.
N-am nevoie de cerealte.
Da. Noi suntem muncitori evrei, nu facem muncă fără lei.
I don't know if I can.
Hi. Yada hi.
Oh, you two.
Unde este fratele Sean?
Uite-i, bă!
I should be drunk. I should get drunk for this.
Yeah, I'm drinking. Are you not drinking?
I do the Romanian national noise better when drunk.
Right.
Here it is. Here we go.
Registrează, băi, și racheta pe și racheta pe păi plângeți ochi și lăcrimați-mă că-și voi sunteți vinovați.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
So that was at a Jewish wedding. I'm assuming that was Romanian, but what about Jake or Bob?
It was. Is that marked as where it was?
It was in Yash. There was a bunch of stuff that was played. Let me see if I can find this other one. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, they kind of stood in the background and then they were invited in, but they just recorded the whole party. So, but it was in Yash.
Do you recognize anything about it, Bob?
A little bit. I have a tape that Stu gave me years ago. I haven't listened to it in a long time. But
I bet that's it. It's the same. I'm sure it's the same one.
In Lechani, which is about 15 kilometers west of Yash, and it was a Romanian brass band. He didn't mention anything Jewish about it.
Yeah, he, I don't know, when we transcribed all of the pieces from that tape that he gave us to try to decide what we wanted to use. And we took that one and we kind of, arranged it a little differently. But he later said to us, yeah, that was actually a Jewish wedding. We were surprised to find out. But I don't know whether he would remember now that much about it, because his memory's a little bit, Brahmanized. But it was very cool to hear that. But one of the tunes I didn't hear in this one, the E flat clarinet and the tubas, and it may be later in the recording that it's there. I heard the tubas, but the E flat clarinet and the trumpet.
In the 70s, in Yash, to hear a brass band like that or anything like that would have been rare because they still had the functioning Bulgar family, the Segal family playing at that
right.
Cool string band.
And
accordion strings, and gypsies who played accordion strings, a symbol. The fanfare stuff starts as soon as you get outside of Yash. And Jews don't play that. You hire gypsies who come to you to do that. And, I don't know.
It's interesting. It's played in a Turkisher rhythm to me, which we think of Turkisher as kind of this very integral part of klezmer, but I think there's only one that I know of, like sort of pre-1950 recording of a Jewish band using a Turkisher rhythm. I think it's like one of the Koch flute Doinas where he goes into like a Turkisher Nachspiel. And I don't know, all the other Turkishers I know are really from Naftula or American guys.
Doesn't Bugic play one?
Does he?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's, yep. From Yash.
Right. But it's also interesting it's with a song, because that's something that I've, often it feels cool or nice to play a Turkisher with a song, but I don't know if I've heard that in recordings either. I haven't thought about it too much, but...
The best thing to say is it's interesting. It's in terms of Jewish repertoire and so forth, it's anomalous, and therefore interesting. We always love a good anomaly, The time when Jewish music was disappearing, like any tradition, when it disappears, it often expresses itself in extreme and strange ways. So, like, for example, in Hungarian folk music presently, there's a couple of guys who sing, and when they sing, they overdo it. They shout, or they play the fiddle like in a somewhat overdone way, which is kind of because once the tradition gets down to its last practitioner, there's very little in the way of other musicians or even a community around you that expects you to be playing within the boundaries of good taste. And you often find people start to express themselves in extreme ways. They, the shouting in Hungarian folk music, where they sing as loud as possible, goes down to two particular old guys who were both the end of the line for the tradition. And when people went to learn in the villages, the only people they could find were these two old extroverts who tended to say, I am a singer! Everybody imitates them,
Well, I think and in our house it's fighting words, but I still believe that the Belf's recordings, I think that's totally parody playing. I think he's playing it up. They're playing it up. The over chirping and totally. Yes. I don't want to even say the Giora Feidman word, but I really think so. I mean, we had this, Josh and Joel Rubin and I had this big discussion, and I just said, in this house, Belf is God. So I'm a sacrilegious person because I just say, I think it's total parody. I mean, it's beautiful.
I agree.
Who agrees? Who said that?
Rubin agrees.
Oh, he is there.
Why do you guys say it's parody?
I think it's it sounds idiosyncratic and overdone. as a musician, it strikes me, it strikes me as just as I agree with Cookie. I just concur with Cookie's statements. That's what I'd like to say.
Well, I mean,
maybe we should listen to some of it before getting too far into it.
I think there's a range, and I think that sometimes, the over chirping. I think that when these were possibly recorded, if they were, think about it. If I'm playing a wedding and I'm going to play Danny Boy or whatever somebody requests, I'm going to do it up. I'm going to like schmaltz it up. And, the recording industry was kind of new. And, especially when immigrants came to America and all these recordings were coming out, Czech, Polish, Russian, Greek, to serve those communities. And there were some parody styles in those. They were also kind of watered down a little bit. But I just think that there are some aspects of the Belf recordings that are totally parody playing. And, Joel Rubin was saying, it's a very possibility. Like, look at that clarinetist Tittenschneider, who had all these tunes that were a little crooked and sometimes is confused with Belf. I just think that it's part of musicianship. It's like almost like blackface in a way, but done by Jewish musicians to be very Jewy.
I said last time we talked about Belf, I said when I went to Itzik Schwartz, who was born in 1905, and he was involved with the Yiddish theater in the 20s. He knew people from the original Abram Gold Fund band. He knew all the Bulgar family and all these people. He had recorded them. I played him Belf, and I asked him, "What do you think of these guys? What's your opinion?" Let's listen to some cuts here. And his final result was, he said, "I think they're young." I said, "That's interesting. Why? Why would you say that?" He said, "They're not good enough to play in the theater. They sound like a bunch of 16-year-olds." And if you listen to it, first of all, I always have this thing I was telling Josh is I think that the piano player was a cymbal player. I think he had not had more than 3 days on a piano keyboard before he went into the video. There was the piano there. That's what they gave him. There are cuts where the violins and the clarinets are playing different melodies until one wins the argument and it's released. Have you ever heard a 16-year-old bluegrass band?
I'm reminded of talking to guys like Toby Torres in San Antonio about recording with guys like Santiago Alameda back in the 30s, about how they would really overdo the polkas and wapangos, and they would really exaggerate the recording, because the recording process was like it was a separate and unique thing from how they would actually play at the dances. They thought of it as this other thing. They didn't, They didn't understand it. And they were oftentimes, he said that the guys who would record them would tell them to really kind of put on a show.
Yeah.
And so,
I can imagine somebody saying, "Hey, check out this chirping noise." And the other guy goes, yeah, do that in the studio next weekend.
What's funny is when Varetsky Pass first got together in 2002, I tape recorded myself playing some tunes, and I mailed in an envelope the cassette tape to Josh and Stu, and they were like, "You're doing this weird ornament. What is it?" But what it was is my bird was on my shoulder, and he would sing when I played. He'd go, "Chirp, chirp." They couldn't figure out how I was doing it.
Wow. I think we should listen to some Belf at some point, and maybe this is the right time. I also want to point out, there's been a bit of a discussion in one of the many sort of little chat groups that there were likely different bands recording under the name Belf. And sort of Joel's been pointing out, there's at least 2, probably 3 or 4 different clarinetists. It's hard to tell about the fiddlers necessarily, and I haven't kind of dug through it. But I did sort of think of a tune to play. There was Lustig, that there's 2 recordings, one from Sirena and one from the other label, in different keys.
Probably.
Yeah, right. And you can, so it might be interesting to listen to both and kind of compare what's happening. I kind of wanted, before we got too far away from it, to just go back to one fiddle nerdy thing, which was like we were talking about this stuff about getting the rhythm and the voice and like everything into the bow. And I'm curious, I guess, I don't know, especially Cookie and Jake and Keryn and like everybody, are there certain things that you do to sort of work on that? Like, I don't know, because I've been trying to work on that a bit, and it's like, sure, like sometimes I practice like going from soft to loud and like speed and pressure and different things, but I'm curious if you have any like other things that you do really trying to develop that, or that you teach your students and whatnot around that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, for instance, if you're playing a tune that has a held note and a short pickup into another downbeat, like da, 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 that kind of thing, it's a tendency to put a stress da, 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 right? So I have them re-articulate that short note, da, 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 so that but without a stop, but kind of a da, release pressure, press and pull, but very smoothly, so that they get the idea that a small word has to also have some love, That's one thing that I, if I'm having them practice scales, God forbid, but if I'm having them do it, which I do, I have them practice it that way, dum, ba, dum, ba, but without an accent, but with an articulation. It's hard to do, but that gives them the idea that you can use your bow your bow can speak. And that's really the idea, is having it speak words without a stop. Because when we speak, we don't go, and that is, like people will do on a bow. We have a lot of elision into our syllables. And, so it's kind of like you have them sing and play exactly the way they hear it, record themselves singing a melody and play it exactly that way. Listening to the micro level. It's hard.
I like that a lot, Cookie, and it's kind of interesting because in a way it's like to the same end, but I often do something exactly opposite from what you're talking about, which is actually like have students choose notes to completely leave out. Like that, there's just like, where are we going? Forget about the rest of it. Just, almost like, and I find that like once, it tends to work. Like if I can really get them to just decide, okay, this is this like structure of so this phrase you're talking about, yay, da da.
Right.
It's like one note, choose one note. And then that actually makes everything else more articulate because
they're direction.
They're seeing it as a direction.
Yeah, I think they're not exclusive. I'm mutually exclusive. I think they're complementary. I think.
Yeah, that's what I said. Is like to the same.
Yeah. Because I think you're right. I think people don't know a lot of times when they're playing, you have a direction. Like when you're speaking, your phrase, you have a word that you're going to. Yeah, Abigale was going to say something.
Yeah, the way that I've been thinking about it recently and really working on it is about consonants. Like when you speak, you have k, t, like these kind of things. And instead of playing like you're just all vowels, like if you think of the beginning of the Taksim that we listened to with Gegna, it starts da. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was playing it for a while just as vowels, like but if you add like a t to it, it's more like you're speaking, you're trying to say something, especially in the spot where he goes, you sing it with a da 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 da. So you're getting these D's. So you're trying to get like a D with your bow, and that helps me.
Yeah. Other ideas, anybody? Keryn? I won't ask you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Darkner.
I mean, I agree totally with, I think we get constricted by first trying to, you know, play it out. But as you said, like Abigale and I think Jake, really singing it first and then thinking about how do I bring that out from the bow. Yeah, if we just do it straight on the bow, sometimes, like Abigail said, it's just like, well, vowels, and then you kind of forget, like, what am I even doing here? So just constantly singing it and trying to see articulation on the bow, and copying the voice, really, and the articulation of various sounds on the tongue, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've definitely been struck by, like, besides bowing, like singing, like if you listen to all these like old recordings of people singing tunes, and especially like some of the Bergovsky, like it's not just Bergovsky, but Ansky and Kislov and all that stuff from that collection. There's these old people singing shares in different dance tunes and stuff, and like there's so much articulation and phrasing in their singing, and I feel like most of us rarely sing that way, let alone play that way. So it's like, I don't know, yeah, it's just something that we've often, I think, lost sensitivity to.
I think we just get so stuck on notes. We're like, oh, what's the next note? Let me write that down, you know. And it's the magic and the beauty happens in the articulation of them. So, yeah.
Cool. No other secret tricks there? Come on, fiddlers. Did we just lose?
I have to go.
Jake? You have to go too. Okay.
I do. I'm just going to say I love all of you.
Yeah, thanks so much for
the people that I know. Let's see, I know everybody there, so I love everybody.
Yeah, it's a big Klezmer family.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, Cookie.
Thanks, Craig. So I got to go, but you're recording this, right? So I can hear the rest of it later.
Yeah, we're catching all of these really smart things you're saying.
Smart. I'm so smart. Okay.
So smart.
Mwah.
Bye. Cool. Well, I don't know. Should we listen to some Belf? Or I've been telling Keryn we're going to listen to this Leon All Doina, like every message I send her, because I love the way she plays it.
Everybody here has listened to some Belf thousands of hours of our lives.
Yeah. Okay. So you think we shouldn't listen to Belf?
I could, but
yeah. Sure. Okay, let's listen to something else. I mean, I find new things in it. Like I found like the Sekun playing. I'm like, I think he's playing more quarter notes than I ever thought that he was. For example. Who cares? I don't know. Yeah. Well, all right. Then following Bob's rule, we'll go. Well, let's listen to the Leon All. That was. It's on the agenda, and it's sort of, I think, another perspective of this, you know, more performance recorded kind of maybe classical klezmer. It's interesting, like I feel like his the Kol Nidre to me sounds sort of more classical than the Doina, which maybe that makes sense, or it's just more lyrical. But okay, so listening mode, everybody. So I don't know. I think that's just one of the most sort of awesome, beautiful pieces recorded in klezmer music, personally. Um, and yeah, his bowing is so expressive and interesting. We were talking about slides earlier, and it's like like he does so many different ways of going up from that G to sort of B flat A, B flat, whatever different thing he does. Um, those are some of the things I notice. Also, the way he plays the what to me is a honga type thing in the end is really interesting. Like I often wonder about like how straight do or did or should Jews play hongas, because it is a more straight kind of a rhythm and dance than a freilux. But like he sort of has some really interesting phrasing while also sort of keeping this bump 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 kind of like thing in it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that hongo too. Actually, I realized that I played a little too straight, at least, how I had been in like some recordings of myself. And yeah, it's more straight than a freilux, but at the same time, I don't know what it is. It's just a combination of his bowing that I personally, it's just like, I can't get down exactly. But then it's also like within it being straight, there's those little, rushes towards certain notes or like holding back a little bit. That's very Jewish, in my opinion. Yeah, it's great. It's so kind of just like this little thing that you can't totally touch or get, and it's also light at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd kind of love for us to listen to it slowed down to really like appreciate that about it. Like there's some parts where it's kind of obvious, like that last section, like he's sort of like there, but like in the first part, it's really, yeah, it's really subtle and like interesting and effective what he does. But I don't know, some other things.
What do we know about where this was recorded?
We don't know nearly enough about all, I think, right?
What are the details that we know? Like that's the thing.
Right.
I'm very interested in,
supposedly
like,
it was
people and where they
it was
made the recordings and who found them.
probably recorded in Poland between 1910 and 1914, according to Kurt. That's all I could find. I've been like starting to try and put together just like a list of these fiddlers and biographical information, which is very small. Yeah. I don't know. Bob, do you have any thoughts about where he might be from based on anything?
Based on the amount of things that were recorded there and the amount of Jewish cultural stuff that was there, my guess is Lemberg.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know that a lot of Tirana and Favorit were recorded there, and that there were huge amounts of spin-offs from the Lemberg Yiddish Theater, Peppy Littman, all these things were being recorded there.
Right.
Some things were recorded, there were probably some things recorded in Vienna, but it came down, in the case of a violinist and a cymbal player, they may have gone somewhere away from home. But in the case of a cymbal player, you got on a train occasionally. Those people didn't travel much. There wasn't a concert circuit for them. So to be a klezmer of that level, and to be playing with the cymbal players, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go on tour. You played in a zone of no more than 1 day's horse cart travel away, and maybe a train trip away. But I don't think people really traveled that much. And for example, I don't think anyone from Lemberg would go to Warsaw to record. I don't think any from Bucharest would go to Lemberg to record. And in the cases of Hungarian recordings, for example, Peppy Littman, that would have been a traveling theater person with one accompanist musician. So my guess is Lemberg.
We have this is from Joel Rubin. We have that Leonol, I think it's on the label, from Moshiska, which is a shtetl near Shemshel, which is halfway between Lemberg and Lemberg and Krakow, I believe. No, halfway between Lemberg and Rzeszów. Probably in the foothills of the Tatras, looks like.
You hear all like it's I think really useful to like look at maps a lot when doing this stuff. So like there's Lemberg, Lviv, which first of all it's kind of like I don't know. I think so often we think of like Ukraine and whatever like obviously just like these borders are we're not necessarily what they are today, but also like just because Kiev and Lviv are in the same country to us, like that doesn't necessarily mean as much as it might to them. But yeah, it's like it seems like so many of these recordings sort of came from this area, which makes you wonder what else was out there also. But like, yeah, it was really important. Where did you say it was halfway between Lviv and
Jeshow?
Jeshow. Is that
ours? Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the Ukrainian side of the border.
Right.
So anyways, I mean, I assume it's on some kind of river or something with a bridge.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about the piece, everybody?
Oh yeah. Hi everybody.
Oh yeah.
It's working?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you probably know or not know, but there's a clarinet recording of the same exact Doina and Honga from Kharkov. I don't know when, but it's issued on the Chekhov's band CD, and it's a clarinetist with an orchestra. Clarinetist Shevelev, and the guitar's orchestra. And it's pretty much it's the same piece. It's played, but it's interesting to compare because it's also different. And it was recorded in Kharkov, which is like on the other side of Ukraine, whatever that means. I guess it means it was a popular piece that one of them wrote and the other played, or someone else wrote it.
Right. I mean, like at least that major, like there's certain sections of it that seem to pop up. I think there's some kind of iteration of it, or maybe a couple in Bergovsky, of like at least strains of the melodies. I'm curious, Bob, like, do you recognize any of those bits of melodies from other things?
No, that's unique to that piece, I think. That's where I've heard it. That is one of the more developed versions. That's what I said. Some of the guys that we have on recording are above the average, and that's why they were recorded. I can imagine also if you have a recording from that same piece from Kharkov, that the piece was at some point or other somebody's showpiece who notated it and wrote it down, because it was if it's on the Chekhov's band stuff, it's not because that they sent the CD to somebody. It was early for that. It would have been from sheet music.
Why are you so sure they didn't just hear the recording and copy it?
In 1912, 1910.
Yeah.
What do you think? What did they do? They picked up a copy of the latest. They got it on MP3.
Yeah.
Those things didn't move until afterwards.
Well, look at Belf. Look at Belf. The three different Belf bands.
Well, I guess it depends when was the first and the other. When were the two records made? What might tell us a little bit about that, right?
Yeah. Just actually a counter to this idea of not disagreeing with Bob, but just adding a little nuance about the best. It was only the best fiddlers who might have recorded. I don't know if you guys have seen Jeff Wallach's article where he actually found some people. He talks about the Ukrainian SSR band that has the lovely Kalabazets and that we all know. It's incredibly virtuosic violin part.
Right.
Well, apparently that fiddler wasn't well regarded. He wasn't really thought of as a great klezmer fiddler.
Well, he was he wasn't really a klezmer, right? Rabinovich?
No, I think he was. He was a klezmer. He wasn't really thought of like as such a virtuosic one necessarily either. I can't remember. I'd have to look back at the article to see what exactly they said about it.
Quick anecdote. I started going to Yash and working with Yitzhak Schwartz in early 1990. In 1999, I was there with Michael, and we decided because of the favor, Itzik wasn't. He was 96 or so. He couldn't move very well. We would take him to shul, and so we actually ordered a taxi. And Francesco Spagnolo and myself, Michael, and Igor Francia from Milan did the Jewish radio show on radio. We basically formed a phalanx so that Itzik would not fall down on the ice, and we transported him to the shul. Now, I've been working with this community at that point for 10 years, almost 9 years. Everybody I went to, I'd say, do you know anything about music? Were there any musicians? Can you tell me any musicians? I was going to this place 4 times a year. We get to the shul, everybody goes, oh, Itzik. It's been so many years since you've been here. We do Saturday, and we're talking to some of the people there. And Michael says, oh, well, we're here because, Bob and I are fiddlers. And somebody says, oh, you should meet so-and-so. He's a fiddler. He goes, there's a fiddler in town. Yeah. So we go. And then I asked one of the heads of the community about this. He said, oh, he's an engineer. He's a retired mechanical engineer. He's no fiddler. Yeah. And a lot of times the attitude was, it's like the joke about the tailor. He's the unknown soldier. He was a great tailor, No one had, after 10 years of being the American guy who running around the Jewish community in Yash asking who plays fiddle, by accident we found him. Okay, he wasn't great. On the other hand, his brother played better fiddle than him, and nobody told me about him. That was Wexler, and he was known as the accordion player who plays with his brother. When we found him, he played. He was the guy that really had the repertoire and the chops. But nobody ever talked about him because he didn't want to be known as a fiddler. And their wives were really shamed by the idea that these foreigners were coming because they were fiddlers. That was not what they wanted their husbands to be famous for. In the case of Wexler, most people don't know about him because I basically promised him I wouldn't tell the world about him. The BBC actually went to him when doing a story on Fanfara Chircolia and asked him about Klezmer, and he went, oh, no, there's no Klezmer in this town. Oh, and it's been since 50 years ago. Nobody plays any Klezmer stuff. It's from a guy who personally plays in Space Tunis. I actually could not bring my band to do a Jewish festival in Yash one time, sponsored by the French Institute. And Wexler, at one point in his life, had been a teacher of French and French literature. So I said, hey, I called him up and said, Reb Wexler, why don't you go make $1,000 playing at the French Institute? I show up a couple months later. He goes, your friends from Yash called. I told them to go to hell. He says, I don't leave this town. I don't go to Israel. Why would I go to Yash? So no, it wasn't something I think people are not. They may amongst Klezmers be proud that they're a good fiddler or something, but everybody else will have a bad word for you. Everybody else will say, "Oh, he's no fiddler. He's no great." I know a great fiddler. He's no great fiddler. I've heard that pretty much from same thing. Well, Gypsy musicians, Transylvania. The people will say nothing but good things about dead fiddlers. Living fiddlers, nobody has a good word for.
What's the point about all?
That people were probably all was a good fiddler. I think he's a good fiddler. We're talking about the guy from Kharkiv, from the Ukrainian State Orchestra,
Rabinovich.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I listened to that. He sounds pretty good. Also, Bergovsky apparently was involved.
There was a point at which Joel believed that he might be the guy who played Bell. A long time ago, Joel made a statement like that. It's possible that he grew up and learned and did that. They were good, they were experienced. But of course, I think that nobody, had a good word for them. Have you met Jews?
Bergovsky apparently was involved with the state ensemble the
He's
Jewish ensemble.
mentioning Rabinovich in his book.
Yeah, yeah, right. He was like working with him.
He's mentioning his grandfather as an example of a klezmer who's not from the klezmer family, and mentioned his grandson as the what is it? Somebody playing bass.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's my daughter.
She's good. She's good.
Do you guys want to hear that clarinet thing?
Yeah.
It's not fiddle, but I never listened to them. You know, I never compared the two actually, so I don't know what the difference is.
It's a great idea.
Mitia, who are you talking about?
Rabinovich. This.
What you're talking about? Rabinovich's grandfather?
You said Rabinovich from the state orchestra of Ukraine, Jewish state.
Yeah.
And obviously he's a chef d'orchestre, right? And Bergovsky mentioned him in his book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a quote here, but in Russian. He said his grandfather, Yosel Moshe Rabinovich, he was born in 1910 and dead in 1810 and dead in 1900. And he wasn't from the Klezmer family. He just became a musician because he wanted to, but he and his grandson was a chef of the Jewish state ensemble in Kiev in Tortis, and he used to play with his grandfather a lot on the weddings.
Oh.
Yeah, it's in the book. Yeah.
Cool. Ilya, you want
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it's like he repeats the first section of the Doina and then doesn't play the last sections, right? And then with the honga, he like also repeats the first two sections and then goes to the third section.
Different version.
Yeah. And it seems to me like he plays the honga a bit straighter than all.
And in Doina, he's got almost no slides. You know, I'll have these great slides on the fiddle. Maybe it's a
It's
fiddle.
because he's a clarinetist, yeah. He doesn't know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, but this like Schneider, he's got like crazy slides.
So what happened? He learned this from Al, or they both learned it from a sheet music, but differently?
Good question.
I mean, they're definitely connected, but they're not like.
One thing I would say is if you listen to the orchestra behind Schneider, it doesn't sound like they're entirely familiar with the arrangement. Some of them have it, some of them don't.
Right.
And then somebody handed them a piece of sheet music 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Whereas the one with all playing with the cymbal sounds like he's been playing that for a long time, and the cymbal player knows what it is. And the one from the Cookie band sounds like, okay, we got to go to the studio in 2 days and play this. Okay.
Is that you, Pete?
So sorry.
What Kim? Let's listen to the all slowed down a little bit. Is that all right on the honga part? Yeah. Okay, it's all right. Apparently. Here we go. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's just it's nice. And like some of those, like the way like da 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 da, like those things are so.
Well, I think I don't know. I think I saw that you guys talked about this last time, but I am curious about, the time limit for recording, but I think you guys mostly covered that. But that's just what I was thinking about. Sometimes how that maybe influences the musical moving forward, because somebody's back there being like, "Gotta go faster. We're gonna run out of our, tape or whatever they used." I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for sure, like, at least, like, seeing, like, oh, in the clarinet one, like, they repeated that section, it's like, and then doesn't play other ones, it's like, I mean, that at least tells you as a performer when you're interpreting it, like, maybe that's what they did, or you could do it, and, like, that just got left out somewhere. Definitely a real concern for them. I mean, yeah, you only had so much time. And I think, like, important to take those things in consideration when we're figuring out our versions of these things.
I mean, you did mention also that there's when it comes to speed, the way they were recorded and then the way that they were then transferred, there's tempo difference between those two as well, right?
Right.
So you can't trust any of it.
Yeah, there's no trusting here.
I think just like at least for me, one thing that needs to always be in the picture is function. Just like whatever musical choices you're making in a particular moment relate to the function of what you're doing. So if you're making a recording for like kind of public consumption, you should play really differently from if you're playing for dancers. If you're playing for 1 or 2 dancers, you should be playing totally differently from if you're playing for 200 dancers. Mm-hmm. And if you're playing in a live concert to thousands of people, I don't know, I play differently if I'm doing that versus if I'm playing in a house concert for 10 people or in a bar.
Yeah, but I think that would have been lost. The novelty of being in a studio in 1912, 1915, those guys did not have a lot of experience in going into studios, and they never sat around and talked to other musicians about how's your feelings about being in a studio? What are you thinking about when you enter the studio? We've got 75 years, 100 years of studio experiences to draw on now, and we can think and talk about that, but the function for these musicians was, I play for a dance, I play for the table. And so when he walked up to the microphone, he was playing, in this case, for the table. And
that's true. But don't you think they're thinking about the function in real time? It's not like there's like a table button that they press and then they do their thing playing for table, or they press the dance button. It's in the moment.
Well, I mean, regardless, no one's dancing, right? So, that's going to be a bit different. Although, I think this piece wasn't ever a dance. Maybe they played that honga for dancing, but, it seems pretty clear, this honga goes with that Doina, like the other recording did, and it wasn't meant for dancing in that iteration.
Remember, there were no overdubs and no second take. You basically said, go in there and play what you did at the wedding.
It's really super dangerous for us to drape anything of our experience upon the experience of these people. And I got a super wake-up call, and personally, from all of my interviews of the older musicians that I encountered, not from the Jewish tradition, obviously, but from the traditions of the people that I interviewed, especially the Hispanic musicians who recorded in the 30s when those technologies showed up, and the Western swing musicians that I interviewed. Oftentimes the people who were operating the machinery was new to them. So these were all new experiences. So folks were nervous when they were in the studio. They didn't understand, we can't drape anything on top of these things. So I would strongly recommend not to converse or to put too much of that in your mind while we're listening to these recordings.
I agree in a way, but why are we listening to these recordings? So that we can?
It's because it's all we've got. We don't have sources that we can sit down and talk to. We just have these recordings. Our community is unique in that respect. Other people can go and do like I've done, for instance, and sit down and talk to these people who actually were on the records. We don't have that opportunity. We just have the residue of these recordings. So it's important not to extrapolate anything beyond that.
But I've done that. Bob's done that. Michael Alpert's done that. I could name Zev Feldman's done that. Andy Statman.
Sure.
Right. Even you've done it. Actually, most of us have done it because we've been around at
But I'm talking about these 1905 recordings. I'm talking about these pioneer recordings that happened when not only the musicians were coming into the studio, but also the people who were recording them. This was a complete new thing. The recording process itself was a complete
attitude towards being in the studio and towards recording music and towards distributing music. It was all new at that time. They were trying something, new. They probably didn't think that I was going to get a lot of money and make. They probably were paid for the session the same way they would have been paid per tune at a table. And so they probably treated it the same way. I'm sure they weren't getting royalties much, you know.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea what was going on in the minds of the people recording this music. So I'm not even talking about that, actually. I'm more just talking about how it serves us as musicians right now.
You get your repertoire, you get your technique.
You get all of that, but
you get your aesthetic.
But I think you get your aesthetic, but I think that, I mean, maybe it's also just a personal thing, but for me, I'm way more interested in getting my aesthetic with what's physically around me. I mean, it's obviously informed by all of these historical recordings and the collections we have and all of this stuff. That's why, I love that. But in terms of practice, like because right, I mean, I think Abigale was asking, so that's what sparked these questions for me. Abigale was asking something about, what were you, I don't remember what it was.
The timing, like the
timing,
not having enough wax. Yeah.
Exactly, like timing about all of these things, and it made me think about the sort of minutia of the timing that we use musically. I think it depends on the moment, and I've seen that happen. I mean, like growing up, going to Klez camp, watching Sid Beckerman play, Pete Sokolow for sure. They're really, really used to serving what's happening right now.
Right. Well, context is absolutely king. Context is 100% essential. But the problem is that we have no grasp of what the context was, especially on the recordings that we've been listening to right now. And so I'm scared to death that even I or you would try and drape any of that context. That's my only comment. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think given all that we just said, it's hard to imagine them playing extremely differently than the way they're used to, because like what would their idea of differently be, kind of, in some ways. I do think, I mean, there's something I think that's sort of been creeping through this whole session, which is like, we have different options as modern fiddlers, which is like, do we try to go for a sound of a certain place? Like, do we try to get like a lot of different aesthetics of different places and different time periods and different levels of classical or professional training or whatever? Or do we go for one thing? For most of us, like, we don't have that thing that we grew up with, so we're not going to ever inherently be like this thing. I think, I mean, like Jake is sort of a great example of like one option of like, dig into a place, actually meet people there, and sort of like try to like establish your connection to, tradition in some sort of living way, in a way that reflects your life and your experience.
I sort of feel like at least personally, I sort of feel like I've sort of in a way had to piece my style together by like taking a head that was cut off from its body and like trying to put it back on. So in whatever way I can, it's right. A little morbid, metaphor.
Grotesque, yeah, I mean, for myself, it's like, I think because I have so much like old time as well as like classical and jazz and different backgrounds, like I'm really drawn to dirty things, but I'm also drawn to like the challenge of playing something like this. And like, it's sort of fun to try on those different bits and like also think about the regional and other things. And like as a teacher, I don't know, I find like it feels like useful to have a sense of those different things to be able to sort of point people in those directions, whether or not that's how I sort of play, is like to at least understand kind of what this world is.
There's a wide spectrum of context as well. I mean, if you look, if we're talking about Klezmer, when Zeb in his book is talking about Klezmer over the last 300 years, you can see the context is changing, the repertoire changes, the performance styles change, and the last, the famous four-part of Klezmer development, co-territorial, core repertoire, that's referring to the last 150 years.
Yeah,
and
right.
we're we need some facility and knowledge of those changes in order to make changes now.
Right.
So that I'm not, so yeah, I choose an aesthetic that's, the function of which is that. I don't actually listen to much John Zorn and Masada because that serves a much different function, But yeah, the same thing with old-timey music. There's, young people today, they may want to learn the fiddle, but they may not be able to go to the mountains and find an old guy who's going to be like, Tommy Jarrell anymore. But they need the recordings from Tommy Jarrell and his father Ben. Nobody plays like the Hammonds anymore, except people who learn from those records. And that's some of the most progressive stuff going on in American music right now. People learning to play the tunes without smoothing them out, So I mean, yeah, there's always, we have a very deep and long historical perspective, and the function. Some of us want to make records. Some of us want to play in bars. Some of us, some of us want to play for our families only. Some of us give up on it. Some of us,
But as flawed a device as it is, these recordings are absolutely essential. And there's and learning and listening to them and parsing them and pulling them apart and listening to every last little bit is 100% essential.
Where would blues music be if Robert Johnson hadn't discovered the gramophone record? He used them to learn from. That was a big context change.
I hope we haven't. I hope this esoteric discussion about American sources has not taken away from our European participants.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm curious. There are some folks we haven't heard from pretty much at all. I'm curious if any of them might have anything they would like to say. No pressure. No pressure.
I'm just learning.
I need a drink.
Yeah, right. I need a drink too. Actually, I have a drink. I'm drinking some honey moonshine from Riga. I recommend it if you ever in Riga, go to the fish market.
What? Are you drunk?
No.
Moonshine?
Yeah, well, it's kind of moonshine. What about you, Mita? You haven't said anything in a while.
I'm still curious about this slide drills.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the last time from Berikovsky. And yeah. I'm not sure if I understand correctly what he means in his sentence. Like, let me quote. He says, blah, 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 lots of implementation. Glissando is common. If a sustained trill of a major of minor second is performed at first with 8 notes at a slow medium tempo. Both pitches are fingered with the same fingering as a glissando-like manner. What does it mean at first?
Oh yeah, right.
It means you start with the glissando and then glissando trill and then regular trill.
I mean, I think maybe he's talking bullshit and he doesn't. Sorry, but like he doesn't play fiddle, right? But because he's saying that it's making glissando vibrato in a half step, and then it becomes a trill. Like it's just a vibrato. I don't know what he's saying. No?
And he's saying the same about the half step and about their 2 half steps. Like a
full step.
Full step, yeah. And I don't. Yeah, maybe he's talking bullshit. And I just wonder because he's like among all the ornaments he talk about this. He doesn't say anything about crests. Like he say trills, mardens, blah blah blah, and this.
And it's like to me, it must be this like, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what happens in this. I can't imagine what else it is.
Yeah, probably this. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody else has an idea.
Yeah. In this recording, we can hear something like this.
Daniel Karkner, I think, pointed out that this the last section, at least, of this honga is in another tune from Herb Steiner, the potpourri. Can we listen to that maybe real quick? I guess we're probably getting to the end here. It's been a little while. Okay. So yeah, it's just the one section there in a similar tune.
Yeah. It's two sections, and it doesn't sound like honga at all.
Yeah.
It's more like hora lautriaska or something like this. I think maybe all of them just trying to copy Lautari style, but badly. Yeah, and like in our way good. Like this Romanian fantasy, it's just I think they're trying to copy Lautari style, but they do something else in the end.
So is there a way, I'm always curious, is there a way to find the original, not the original, but the Lautari recording of this honga? And of everything.
Would be interesting.
Or recording or a sheet music or anything.
I think we found something very close to it. I can't remember what the violinist's name was. Bob, do you remember? This was like a Facebook thread from last year at some point.
That's Sean.
I think actually Keryn might have first posted it or something.
Maybe.
I think it was. I think now that I recall, I think the Romanian recording was later.
Possible.
Well, I wonder if we should sort of wrap up and maybe come back to that. I had told myself we wouldn't go longer than 2 hours, and it's been closer to 2.5. Yeah.
You're coming up into the question of like, oh, okay, what, where does Lautar abut Klezmer? So
Yeah.
Melt is your next theme.
Right. That will lead us into the Romanian thing. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing this. It's been really special and wonderful, and nice to have some more perspectives here this time. There's still so much more to dig into, but I feel like we really touched on some interesting points. I hope you all agree. So we'll have to do this again sometime, I guess, huh? Yeah?
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'm going to do...